All right, awesome. Okay, so we're in the chapter A Vision for You, and where we're going to pick up the reading is on page 155. It's going to be the first full paragraph that starts with his call to the clergyman. But one of the things that, oh, hey, I'll co-host you. I'm glad you're here. Whoop, we got you. All right, so, and I am grateful that everyone's here. I'm so glad those that just came and those that were here, we were chit-chatting. I'm grateful you're all here. So we're going to start the reading at 155, his call to the clergyman. But I want to kind of tell the story of the backstory. How did we get to this phone booth? What's going on in this story? Just so we have some review and because it's fun and dramatic and thematic. In fact, it's so thematic. If you ever want to watch it, there's a movie that was made, and it's My Name is Bill W. It's got James Woods and I think Gary Sinise, and you can kind of watch a dramatized version of the events that we're going to read tonight. So what happened is Bill Wilson, he goes to the town's hospital armed with the knowledge of what his problem is. He knows that he's an alcoholic. He knows that he can't control the amount that he takes once he starts to drink. And he knows he's doomed to drink again because of this mental obsession. He understands the hopelessness of his alcoholic dilemma. His friend, Ebby Thatcher, shows up and carries with him the solution that we have in Alcoholics Anonymous, which is that a spiritual awakening is sufficient to overcome alcoholism. And through the Oxford group, he carried what later became our 12 steps. So Bill Wilson, which is our program of action, how we get from the hopelessness to the hope. So Bill Wilson, he's in the town's hospital in New York City. He works these steps. He takes this course of action, and he has a powerful, profound change. And he stays sober. And because the change was so powerful and profound, he had this desire to go and help and work with others. And for 6 months, he was out intensively working with other alcoholics, trying to carry this message. And one after another, after another, after another, and not a single one of them stayed sober. And Bill Wilson, I mean, there's a story, and I've heard that the story is not true. So I'm going to preface the story that I'm absolutely going to tell with, it's probably not true, but a lot of AA history and a lot of the history from which the big book came and which the founding members came is they're more parables than they are like the factual events of what happened. Did they meet in the kitchen or did they meet in the upstairs living room? You know what I mean? I don't think it matters. And so the story goes, the legend, which is probably not true, goes that Bill Wilson, he's feeling defeated and dejected. And keep in mind, this is a guy, he's still broke and discredited among his Wall Street guys. And he's not bringing any money. His wife, Lois, is still supporting him. And he's like, listen, Lois, you know, I think I might want to redirect and spend my attention on making money and getting you, financially comfortable again, so you don't have to work at the department store anymore. Nobody's staying sober. And what Lois didn't, but for our purposes definitely did say, was, Bill, but you've stayed sober. And that was the first time in Bill's life that he had that contented sobriety. And Bill Wilson, he goes back to Dr. Silkworth, the gentleman who is running the hospital, the town's hospital. He's like, Dr. Silkworth, what's going on? Nobody's staying sober. And Dr. Silkworth's like, man, he definitely said man. He definitely said dude. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. We're talking about the very literal conversation that Dr. Silkworth had with Bill Wilson. So he's like, sup, homie, what are you doing? And Bill Wilson's like, I don't know. I'm telling him about the spiritual awakening. I'm telling him about the spiritual experiences. Like, whoa. Don't lean in with that. It's a bunch of drunks. They don't want to hear about that. Why don't you tell them from your own experience what I told you? Tell them about the physical allergy. Tell them about that mental obsession, about how when it comes to alcohol, you have no willpower against taking that first drink. And the first gentleman he's going to do that with is Dr. Bob. But Bill Wilson, he goes and he's going to go to this town in Ohio called Akron, Ohio. And what he's going to do is he's going to combine these companies and he's going to put them together. And as Rob put in the chat last week, it was about combining like rubber companies to make tires. that sort of thing. Akron, Ohio is a big rubber town. They're in the rubber business. And he, pew, 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 welcome, glad you're here. And he was going to make it rich. He was finally going to be back. On page 3, I had arrived. Man, he was going to be back, and I had arrived. No more Macy's for you, Lois. We're back on our feet financially. And what happened? Well, what happened is it got so bogged down in argument and fighting and lawyers and all the legal mumbo jumbo. It was bad, and it fell apart. And what happens is Bill Wilson, he's hanging out in this hotel, the Mayflower Hotel in Akron, Ohio. He's discredited. He's broke. He doesn't know if he's going to have enough money to pay his hotel bill, let alone get the train ride home. And he's feeling that sense of hopelessness. And I always point out, doesn't a spiritual awakening always begin with me not getting what I want? And that's what happened for Bill. He didn't get what he wanted, and as a result, he got what he needs. So Bill Wilson, he's in this Mayflower hotel. He's stressed. He's having a real tough time. And to the right of him, and it's a little thematic. I'm making it a little thematic, but to the right of him, and welcome everyone that's joining. I'm so glad you guys are here. I'm leading us up to where we left off last week, which was A Vision for You, page 155. And so Bill Wilson, he's in the hotel lobby of the Mayflower Hotel, and he's just stressing and worrying about money and finances and reputation. And to the right of him is the bar. And you can hear the laughter from the bar, that ha, ha, ha. You can hear the ice clinking on the glass, clink, 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 one of those. And to the left of him, probably not literally, but to the left of him is the phone booth. And he has this moment. He's like, I've been sober 6 months. Maybe I could handle, I don't know, maybe 6 drinks, no more. What happens? Fear grips him. He knows that's the mental obsession. How was he able to know that was the mental obsession? It wasn't about studying. It wasn't about learning. It was through working with others for 6 months. And in that moment, he's restored to sanity. See, working with others allows me to live in that peaceful, contented sobriety. Working with others is not top tier, extra special, gold star 12 step. For someone like me, it's a minimum requirement. And in that moment, he's restored to sanity. And instead, he turns to the phone booth and he lifts up the receiver. And that's where we left off. So we're going to pick up top of 155. And so it says his call to the clergyman led him presently to a certain resident of the town who, though formerly able and respected, was then nearing the nadir of alcoholic despair. If you don't know what the word nadir is, that is the lowest point. Can I look at my life and think, oh yeah, we're going to rock and roll that story. I'm so here for it. But that nadir, have I at any point in my life been that person who was maybe able, was respected? Did I have a Bill Wilson, I had arrived moment? I'll let you know I never did. I never had that I had arrived. But now, have I had that point where I feel like I'm reaching the lowest point of despair as a result of this illness? And so what Bill Wilson does is he picks up the phone and he calls a gentleman by the name of Reverend Walter Tunks. And he gives him some people to connect with. Let me double check. And gave him a list of 10 names to call. And he was trying to find people, and one of my unsung, not my, but our unsung heroes, but I just love her the most, Henrietta Seiberling. She talks about this moment, and she talks about those church guys. Some of them he got a hold of, and they were like, "Oh, I can't help you. I'm not going to help you." And I love her. She was very judgmental. I love her the most. She was like, "Well, it's not very Christian of them." She's the best. I love her. But he finally gets a hold of somebody by the name of Norman Shepherd. And Norman Shepherd connects him with a woman. And if you look on Rob's screen, you can see her. She's hopefully, but ass is a word that I'm allowed to say, but she is a badass of our history. One of those badass non-alcoholic women, and without her, we might not be here. And so he picks up the phone and gets a hold of Henrietta Seiberling. And and so he picks up the phone, he's calling Henrietta Seiberling. What does he say? He says, listen, I'm a member of the Oxford group, because that's who he was connected with at that time. And I'm a rum hound from New York. Do you have anyone that I could possibly work with? Is there anyone that I could help? And Henrietta Seiberling says, this is the gift from the gods. I'm paraphrasing what she said. And you see, what had happened is several weeks prior, Henrietta Seiberling had a prayer group for Dr. Bob. See, Dr. Bob thought nobody knew of his alcoholism, but they were having a prayer group for it, kind of like we do. And that drunk on the other end of the line, Bill Wilson, saying, man, do you have someone I can help? It's a reminder that if I'm struggling with the belief of a power greater than myself, is it possible that my own sobriety and a desire to help another alcoholic is an answered prayer? Because that's what it was for Henrietta Seiberling. Bill Wilson calling her up, and she says, essentially, this is the answer to my prayers. And so she calls up Ann Smith, Dr. Bob's wife, and they set up a meeting. And we're going to talk about that meeting and how it got set up. We're going to pop over to Dr. Bob's story, but we're first going to do a couple more paragraphs in A Vision for You. Those that know me know that I like to bounce around a lot, so we will be doing that. And so this is Dr. Bob. This is where he was. He's a formerly respected surgeon, but he was now nearing that lowest place of alcoholic despair. Despair is another name for hopelessness. And as we've been going through, we've been pointing out hopeless, 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 hopeless. Because it is only at that hopelessness am I able to accept the hope that is on offer. And it says it was the usual situation. I can ask, has this situation sound familiar? Because it's the usual. Home in jeopardy, wife ill, children distracted, bills in arrears, and standing, that means reputation damaged. This is important. He had a desperate desire to stop, but saw no way out. And again, for those that know, A Way Out was going to be one of the possible titles of this book, right? And so it says, for he had earnestly tried many avenues of escape. And what we're going to see is Dr. Bob was already in the Oxford group. He was already in the Oxford movement. He was so close to this thing. But here's what he did not understand. It says, being painfully aware of being somehow abnormal, the man did not fully realize what it meant to be an alcoholic. And how often did myself, or maybe any of us, come to the rooms of 12-step and not know the nature of the illness? See, I don't know about you, but I thought I could use some willpower on this thing. I thought I could, I thought that I must be weak. I thought I must be immoral. I thought I must be the worst human being because I didn't want to do it again. And yet I did it again. And I just talk about this because for me, when I was separated from alcohol and drugs, that's when I started to get worse. That's when the pain was there. That's when the depression was there. That's when the anxiety was there. That's when I felt that hole in my soul. And I thought it was something else. I thought it was my Andes. And I got a clear indication early on that I don't drink or do anything else like a lady, that once I start, I can't control the amount that I take. But when I heard the diagnostic criteria, that was me. And we're going to see that's exactly what happened to Dr. Bob. So it says, when our friend related his experience, and what we're talking about is his experience with his alcoholism, the man agreed. Now, our friend in this case is Bill Wilson, and the man, Dr. Bob, just in case it's hard to keep track of the who's who, agreed that no amount of willpower he might muster could stop his drinking for long. He was able to concede that he had this mental obsession. A spiritual experience, he conceded, was absolutely necessary. So he agrees, I need this solution. I agree that I have this problem. I agree, I need the solution. But the price seemed high upon the basis suggested. And I'm sure no one here has ever done this thing. But when you go to a meeting and you look at the steps, and you're like, oh boy, that seems like a really high price to pay. I'm sure everyone in this meeting came, to the rooms and saw the steps and was like, Oh boy, I'd love to do that. I've got no issue with any of those. A confession? Love to tell everybody my stuff. Amends even to my ex? Absolutely. I'll get right on that. Prayer and meditation? I've got no issue with any of those. And goodness golly, I love helping others, right? I'm sure that was nobody, but that's a common experience. That idea of like, man, I can see that that's a good idea, but I'd rather not. And that was Dr. Bob's experience. And it says he told how he lived in constant worry about those who might find out about his alcoholism. He had, of course, the familiar obsession that few knew of his drinking. Why, he argued, should he lose the remainder of his business only to bring about more suffering to his family by foolishly admitting his plight to the people from whom he made his livelihood? He would do anything, he said, but that. I'm willing to do anything except that. And so what is Dr. Bob resistant towards? What is Dr. Bob not open to doing? It's making amends. And keep in mind, Dr. Bob, he's a surgeon, and really he was struggling financially and he didn't want to lose his business. And so that's where we're going to leave off on 155, where, okay, he's willing to do everything, but he's not willing to do that. Now let's pop over to page 178, and we're going to see how the rest of that story plays out. Now we're going to go a little bit earlier on in the story just to kind of like pepper in the details. We're in Dr. Bob's nightmare. And what we're going to pick up is on the first full paragraph. And it says, about the time of the beer experiment. I don't know if anyone here has ever run a beer experiment or two, but he did. And about that time it would be about 1933 is the year. It says, about the time of the beer experiment, I was thrown in with a crowd of people. And this crowd of people is the Oxford group of Akron, Ohio. And there's something in the chat that I want to make sure I read. So yeah, in the chat, and I would do anything for love, but I won't do that, right? Yeah, think of that song. Oh, yeah. And so he's thrown into the Oxford group. And I just want to compare what his initial experience with the Oxford group is like. Can we compare that, our experience, with some of the first few meetings that we might have been to? So this crowd of people who attracted me because of their seeming poise, health, and happiness. They spoke of great freedom from embarrassment, which I could never do. They seemed very much at ease on all occasions and appeared to be very healthy. More than these attributes, they seemed to be happy. I don't know about you, but by the time I came in here, I genuinely, I could not wish to be happy. Like misery was so much of all that I knew. The best that I could hope for was wanting to want to be happy. That happiness was so out of grasp. And I saw that you guys were happy and sober at the same time. You guys had something that I didn't have. Now, I'll be honest, when I'm filled with self-hatred and self-loathing, it's easy for somebody like me to confuse confidence and self-comfortability with arrogance. I was like, oh, those guys so full of themselves, not dripping with disdain and self-hatred. But that's what's on offer, this real freedom. He says, I was self-conscious and ill at ease most of the time, self-conscious, thinking about myself, and ill at ease, that anxiety, that unsettled feeling. And it says, my health was at the breaking point, and I was thoroughly miserable, or those things that I can relate to. I sensed they had something I did not have, from which I might readily profit. I learned that there was something of a spiritual nature, which didn't appeal to me very much. I'm sure there's some people in the room that can relate to that. But I thought it could do no harm. And so even though the spiritual nature of this thing he wasn't jazzed about that, jazzercised, as he would definitely say in the 1930s, I'm just joking. He wasn't excited about that, but what opened him up to the idea of a spiritual solution? Well, it was the demonstration of these Oxford group members, not yelling at him, not condemning him, not saying you better do it our way. No, how they lived their life and how they carried themselves, their ability to demonstrate the power of the principles of these, what are for us, these 12 steps. That's what opened him up. And that's what I'm called to do, to live this way of life in a way that demonstrates this power. And so he says, I gave the matter much time and study for the next 2.5 years, but I still got tight. That means drunk every night, nevertheless. Give me one sec. Oh, yeah, so absolutely. So we read the very first paragraph of page 178, where the Dr. Bob's nightmare, and we popped over from page 155, basically 155, top paragraph to bottom paragraph. Hopefully that gets you sorted. Awesome. Yeah, so it says, I gave the matter much time and study for the next 2.5 years, but I still got tight. That means drunk, nevertheless. I read everything I could find and talked to everyone who I thought knew anything about it. Now, I want to point something out. He's doing a lot of reading. He's doing a lot of talking. But what is he not doing? A lot of the actions of the steps. And goodness gracious, he doesn't know what he doesn't know. And what he doesn't know is that his life depends on it. So it says, my wife became deeply interested. And it was her interest that sustained mine. Though I at no time sensed that it might be an answer to my liquor problem. How my wife kept her faith and courage during all those years, I'll never know, but she did. If she had not, I know I would have been dead long ago. For some reason, we alcoholics have the gift of picking out the world's finest women. And I want to have a confession with you. Every time I've read that line, my alcoholic hat comes off and I feel tempted to put on my Al-Anon hat and be like, absolutely. My exes, didn't they have the knack for picking the world's finest women? I mean, my inventory will reveal that there's more going on. And those poor men were swimming in red flags. I thought it might have been a carnival, but no, red flag circus. Anywho, it says why they should be subjected to the tortures we inflict upon them. I cannot explain. About this time, a lady called up my wife, and that lady is our girl, Henrietta Seiberling, one Saturday afternoon, saying she wanted me to come over that evening to meet a friend of hers who might help me. And again, keep in mind the connection that had to be made. So Bill Wilson goes into that phone booth. He calls Reverend Walter Tunks, who gives him these numbers. He finally gets a hold of Norman Shepherd. Norman Shepherd gets a hold of Henrietta Seiberling. Henrietta Seiberling gets a hold of Ann Smith. And they then have to connect back to Bill Wilson, who's in that hotel lobby. And see, it's one of those things, if I'm struggling with a belief of a power greater than myself, man, I can't ignore the miracle that is that. I don't know about you, but even in 2023, like, I will often telephone tag with people. You know what I mean? I will regularly miss calls. There's no, text messaging. There's no voice memo. There's no answering machines. A lot of the phones at this time have a party line. You don't even have your own, you know what I mean? The phone would ring. You didn't even know if it was for you. And none of those calls are missed. None of those. And like Bill Wilson, he gets connected with exactly who he needs to get connected with. Man, I don't know about you, but I can see a power greater than myself all over that. And so it says, it was the day before Mother's Day, and I love this visual. It's Mother's Day. Dr. Bob, he is married to his wife, Ann Smith. They have children. She is a mother. So it's a day where maybe we should be doing something nice for our mothers and preparing to do something nice for our mothers or our, wives, spouses, the mothers of our children. And so Dr. Bob, he gets this idea, going to do something nice for Mother's Day. So it was the day before Mother's Day, and I had come home plastered. Only an alcoholic, plastered, just going to throw that out. Plastered, carrying a big potted plant, which I sat down on the table and forthwith went upstairs and passed out. And I love this. And I don't think this is how it went, but just I imagine that he's drunk, stumbling along somewhere. He sees one of those big potted plants that's decoration for restaurants. He picks it up, he drags it there, it's cracked and broken. He sets it on the kitchen table. There's soil everywhere. And he's like, I did good this year. Goes to bed and passes out. You know what I mean? And I don't know about you. It's all I can relate. All I can say is I perhaps relate to some of those important family gatherings and ruining them like that. Oh, so the next day she called again, wishing to be polite. Though I felt very badly, I said, let's make the call. Again, maybe if we hadn't messed up the Mother's Day, he wouldn't be here. And extracted from my wife a promise that we would not stay over 15 minutes. No longer than 15 minutes. I've talked to everyone there is to talk to about this. I'm only doing this, and it was probably less defensive because, after we've ruined a big thing and we've made a jerk out of ourselves, one of those, we're a little willing to do things we don't want to do. But 15 minutes. We entered her house. So they have their initial meeting in Henrietta's home at exactly 5 o'clock. Now, this meeting happens 5 o'clock, May 12th of 1935. And welcome those who just joined us. We're bouncing around. We're in Dr. Bob's Nightmare. We're on page 179. So May 12th, 1935, 5 o'clock. And it was 11:15 when we left. So much for that 15 minutes, closer to 5. Yeah, 6.5, 5.5 hours. I was trusting your math. I was not doing the math in my head. Yeah, it would be 6.5. Yep. It's a little alarming. Hey, welcome. I used to be a math tutor, so just take that with a grain of concern. All right. So I had a couple shorter talks with this man afterward and stopped drinking abruptly. Now, one of the things I want to point out about he stopped drinking abruptly, he starts to do some of the work with Bill Wilson. But what is the one thing he does not want to do? What is the one thing that he's closed off towards? What is the one thing that he's not willing to do? He's not willing to make amends. So he's not taking all of the action. And this is what happens. So this dry spell lasted for about 3 weeks. Then I went to Atlantic City to attend a several days meeting of a national society of which I was a member. So he's going to go to a medical conference in Atlantic City. And the date of this conference was June 10th to the 14th of 1935, just for anyone who might find that information helpful. And then here's what happens. I drank all the scotch they had on the train and brought several quarts on my way to the hotel. This was on Sunday. I got tight, that's drunk, that night and stayed sober until Monday, till after the dinner, then proceeded to get tight again. I drank all I dared in the bar and then went to my room to finish the job. Tuesday, I started in the morning, getting well organized by noon. And what we can see is before he took that drink, he had that mental obsession that it'll be fine. I'll drink while I'm away. It'll be okay. I'll drink while I'm at this conference. I'll get sober by the time I have to go back to Akron. And what kicked off for him was the allergy, where he absolutely could not stop. And one of the things I love, man, it would have been real great if we still used getting drunk as getting well organized. Because I would have told y'all, listen, I do not have an alcohol problem. I'm really into getting organized. That's what I'm about. I'm into organization, you guys. That's what I'm gonna Marie Kondo the booze. Does this bring joy? Yes, I will drink it. You know what I mean? Yeah. That's probably one of my weirder references. It's probably not one of my weirder references, actually, the more I think about it. Glad you guys are here. All right. So it says, I did not want to disgrace myself. So I then checked out. I bought some more liquor on the way to the depot. I had to wait some time for the train. I remember nothing from then on until I woke up at a friend's house in a town near home. And what I want to point out is that wasn't a friend. That wasn't an old drinking buddy friend. That was Lily, his office receptionist. And all I'm just saying is if you've got employees, it's probably not the coolest thing to do to show up in a blackout at their home uninvited. So I just kind of want to paint the picture of what's going on for Dr. Bob. These good people notified my wife, who sent my newly made friend, that's Bill Wilson, over to get me. He came home and he came and got me home and to bed. Gave me a few drinks that night and one bottle of beer the next morning. That was June 10th, 1935. It was probably actually as late as June 17th. We celebrate Founders Day as June 10th, but just so we know, his writing date was probably June 17th. But that was June 10th, 1935, and that was my last drink. As I write, nearly 4 years have passed now. Yeah, he was given a beer and a goofball, which again, the names for things back then were just delightful. You know what I mean? Beer and a goofball. And that was a sedative to steady his nerves. And the reason they had to do that is Dr. Bob was a surgeon, and he came to that morning and he had to perform surgery. And so, yeah, he was a proctologist. He was a colorectal surgeon. And I always point out, like, man, if you got to get any surgeon, but especially a colorectal surgeon, you want one sober. You know what I mean? I don't want one that's detoxing off of beer and taking a goofball to steady his nerves, but that's what was happening. And I make the joke, we don't know what happened to that patient. We might, I'm sure he was fine. And so what we're going to do, let's pop back over to page 155. Oh, do you have info on that? He was a drunken bum who looked up bums. That is not the info I thought it would be. Absolutely. So let's pop back over to page 155, and we're going to read what happened. And then I just feel like, in honor of our proctologist friend, we'll finish off his story in a little bit. So very bottom paragraph of 155. So he's willing to do everything but amends. It says, being intrigued, however, he invited our friend to his home. Sometime later, and just as he was getting control of his liquor situation, that conference in Atlantic City, he went on a roaring bender. For him, this was the spree that ended all sprees. He saw that he would have to face his problems squarely, that God might give him mastery. And so that morning, he gets the beer, he gets the goofball, he goes off and does the surgery. So this one morning, he took the bull by the horns and set out to tell those he feared what his trouble had been. He goes out after his roaring bender on a roaring, what I like to call a mender. So he goes from bender to a mender. He goes out and makes all of his amends. It's actually funny. I sometimes make these little designs, and I made, yeah, he absolutely did. He made his amends in one day. And I make these little stickers sometimes, and I have a couple like Dr. Bob Amender stickers that I made, and yeah. So if anyone's interested in that, but yeah, instead of going on a bender, he goes on an amender. Oh, absolutely. I have a brain that's I'm sure you guys have figured a little weird. And I sometimes make stickers with some AA stuff. There's a line in Dr. Bob's Nightmare about being boiled as an owl, and I made a little sticker that says recovered from being boiled as an owl. So some of them are weird and very obscure, and if you're ever interested, want some stickers, I'll send you some. So I don't sell them, by the way. This is not like me marketing them. That's me going on a little tangent. Anywho, so he goes out on his amender, and it says he found himself surprisingly well received. And goodness, what what does it say when it talks about amends? It says in 9 cases out of 10, the unexpected happens. What is unexpected? That it goes well. We don't expect that. I never expect it to go well, and it does. And it says, and he learned that many knew of his drinking. Shock and awe. Stepping into his car, he made the rounds of people he had hurt. He trembled as he went about, for this might mean ruin, particularly in his line of business. And that's the thing, you know, talking about amends and talking about amenders, it's okay to be scared and do it anyways. In fact, that's often how I have to do this thing. Be scared, be afraid, not sure it's going to work, and do it anyways. That leap of faith. It says at midnight, he came home exhausted, but very happy. He has not had a drink since. That permanent sobriety came after taking the actions that he did not want to take. And so one of the things is, you know, that's off when we relapse or struggle, it's rarely what happened. It's what didn't happen. What actions did I not take? And it says, and we shall see, he now means a great deal to his community. And the major liabilities of 30 years of hard drinking have been repaired in 4. You know, so, and we're going to see how quickly it did not take him. He made his amends in a day. He made his amends in a day. It does not take long to get well, does not take long to stay well. Now, I feel like we should finish off Dr. Bob's nightmare. So let's pop over to page 180. I know he got Bill Dodson all prepped to go, but we'll maybe have to see him in a little bit. All right, so it says that was June 1935, and that was my last drink. Back on page 180, and as I write, nearly 4 years had passed. The question which might naturally come into your mind would be, what did the man do or say that was different from what the others had done or said? Keep in mind, he talked to everyone that he could think of to talk to about alcoholism. And it said, it must be remembered that it's honestly one of those things, if I just read it, the thing that I say will just be said in the book, but often I get ahead of myself. It must be remembered that I had read a great deal and talked to everyone who knew or thought they knew anything about the subject of alcoholism. But this was a man who had experienced many years of frightful drinking, who had most all the drunkard's experiences known to man, but who had been cured by the very means I had been trying to employ, to say the spiritual approach. He gave me information about the subject of alcoholism, which was undoubtedly helpful. And this is in italics, so it's of the utmost importance. It says of far more importance was the fact that he was the first living human with whom I had ever talked, who knew what he was talking about in regards to alcoholism from actual experience. In other words, he talked my language. He knew all the answers, and certainly not because he had picked them up in his reading. And that is what we have to offer, our experience with the illness. The worst things that we've ever done, the worst things that have happened to me, they get transformed, and I get to use them to help and to be of service to others. It is useful. And he talks about it as a most wonderful blessing to be relieved of the terrible curse with which I was afflicted. My health is good, and I have regained my self-respect and the respect of my colleagues. My home life is ideal, and my business is as good as can be expected in these uncertain times. He did struggle financially after getting sober, and I always kind of talk about this. You know, it talks about how financial success is on the way for many of us, but we must not put material success ahead of spiritual growth. Dr. Bill Wilson, he never had the money he made on page 3. I had arrived. I got that expense account and everything. He actually, and I speak about this quite a bit, he lost his home in sobriety. They were homeless in sobriety. Dr. Bob was struggling very much in sobriety. Fitz Mayo struggled financially. but with their lives, they've done so much more. And again, it's more than okay. And most of us do get on our feet financially, but I don't think that's the benchmark of success in this thing. It says it is, it says, I spent a great deal of time passing on what I learned to others who want and need it badly. I do it for 4 reasons. Now, at my home group, so it says Dr. Bob was spending approximately 10 hours a day working with alcoholics. Therefore, he had little time to do his practice. And to be honest, it was probably a little bit more like he had a lot of free time because his practice wasn't going. He had a lot of time to work with others. And in the you know what? We're going on a bit of a tangent, but I'm sure that's not a surprise for anyone that's still here. But Dr. Bob, he absolutely did not charge. Yeah. And broker, not helping others makes you rich. Yes, absolutely. It doesn't matter if I'm broke, it's helping others. And Dr. Bob, and we can see this at the start of Dr. Bob's Nightmare, talks about how he worked with something like 5,000 different alcoholics in his 16 years. So he sobered up and lived 16 years and then passed of cancer. And so that would be like a number of people a day, taking them through the steps. And, it's one of those things, like that is that level of service that I aspire towards. I'm a couple of years away from 16, but I'll tell you, it's not that many, but I do spend a lot of time working with others. And just kind of talking about some of the non-alcoholic women who have been unsung heroes for the foundation of this thing. It reminds me of Sister Ignatia. Sister Ignatia was a nurse and a nun that worked at the not the town's hospital, at the Akron City Hospital. And alcoholics weren't ideal patients. They didn't want to deal with them. And they try to be like, no, we're not dealing with any drunks. And Sister Ignatia, what she would do is she would sneak in alcoholics, one of those you can look and see her on Rob's screen, one of those badass non-alcoholics, sneaking in drunks. And she would talk about, how she'd, see a drunk and really, fall in love with people like us. And she'd want us to get it. And Dr. Bob had a knack for telling who was open and who wasn't, and she said he was always right. I'd be like, please, and he's not interested. And he was always right. And if you're not sold on Sister Ignatia and what an amazing gal she was, if it wasn't for her, we wouldn't have coffee in our meetings and we wouldn't have sobriety chips. So she thought, like, alcoholics, they should have coffee. Thank you, sister. But also, one of the things that she would do is when patients were getting out of the hospital that had worked with Dr. Bob, she would give them like the Sacred Heart medallion. She's a nun, she's Catholic, and she would tell them, now listen, if you feel like drinking, you've got to come back here and give me that chip back before you take a drink. So she didn't fully understand how the mental obsession worked, but I just love that idea of like, no, you got to give me that thing back before you go take a drink. And then just to read some of what's put in the chat, she was born Mary Gavin in 1889 in Ireland. Sister Ignatia, she worked closely with Dr. Bob, and starting in 1939, they worked together to help admit alcoholics to St. Thomas Hospital in Akron, Ohio. She surmounted obstacles to personally care for thousands of alcoholics. For several decades, she helped alcoholics in Akron and later at St. Vincent Charity Hospital in Cleveland. And she made sure they had a coffee bar in the hospital. Absolutely. And so I just love that history. And, this is talking about Henrietta Seiberling again. In that interview, she talks, the interview, you can listen to it on YouTube. It's an interview with her and her son that was recorded, I think, for Founders Day. And she was kind of talking about like how when people wanted to like kind of tone down the higher power business, in the meeting, she had an opinion and she was like feisty and fiery. And here's what she said. I think it's a great quote. She says, well, we're not out to please alcoholics. They've been pleasing themselves all these years. Ooh, sick burn. And she said, we are out to please God. And if you don't talk about what God does and your faith and your guidance, then you might as well be a Rotary Club or something like that, because God is your only source of power. And I don't know. I'm a weirdo. I love being called out like that. I'm like, oh, sister, or not sister, Henrietta. Yeah, fair enough, girl. I hear you. And so I'm going back to the reading on page 181. Dr. Bob, he was intensive and active and working with others. And he did it for 4 reasons. And we read these 4. Yeah, in if you want to see her again in Rob's screen. So we read this at my home group at the end of the meeting, just to really emphasize that's what we're here to do. And here's why. 1, it is a sense of duty. And I don't know about you, but for me, I really truly believe that, like, man, I owe this book, I owe this work, I owe the fellowships that I'm involved with my life. And it's a debt. And it's a debt that I can never repay. And here's why I can never repay it. Every single time I go to repay it, I get more than I could have ever imagined. And I'm further in debt. You know, nobody's going to ask me to pay it, but that sense of duty. 2, it is a pleasure. It really is, man. And I don't mean this in a, if you haven't sponsored, man, if you haven't sponsored yet, let us help you, because this truly becomes that bright spot of our lives. It says 3, because in so doing, I am paying my debt to the man who took the time to pass it on to me. Again, that idea of a debt that I can't repay. But how cool is that? That Dr. Bill Wilson, having his vision in the town's hospital, I might carry this message to others. He carries it to Dr. Bob, who carried it to others, who carried it to others, and then others who carried it to us. I get to be a small link in the chain of that meeting that happened in Henrietta Seiberling's house. How cool is that? 4, because every time I do it, I take out a little more insurance against a possible slip. Nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. It works when other activities fail. Working with others works. And then it says, unlike most of our crowd, I did not get over my craving for liquor much during the first 2.5 years of abstinence. It was almost always with me, but at no time have I been anywhere near yielding. I used to get terribly upset when I saw my friends drink, and I knew I could not, but I schooled myself to believe that though I had once had the same privilege, I had abused it so frightfully that it was withdrawn. So it's that idea that maybe at one point in my life, I might have been a moderate drinker, but I abused that privilege of being a moderate drinker, moderate user, moderate whatever, to the point that that moderation's gone and I'm stuck with this illness. You know what I'm saying? So it doesn't behoove me to squawk about it. For after all, no one ever had to throw me down and pour liquor down my throat. And I will let you know, I do regularly use the word behoove in sentences, which doesn't make me smart. It makes me weird. So it's no advantage of his to squawk, we just complain about it. And it says, if you think you are an atheist, an agnostic, a skeptic, or have any other form of intellectual pride, which keeps you from accepting what is in this book, I feel sorry for you. If you still think you are strong enough to beat the game alone, that's your affair. But if you really and truly want to quit drinking liquor for good and all, and sincerely feel that you must have some help, we know that we have an answer for you. It never fails. That's a promise. Here's the fine print. Now keep in mind, all our promises come with some fine print. If you go about it with 1/2 the zeal you have been in the habit of showing when you are getting another drink. And I love this. Your Heavenly Father will never let you down. If the words Heavenly Father don't resonate with you, higher power, creator, spirit of the universe, the God or power of your own understanding will never let you down. And what a promise that is. You know, and I've had stuff happen. I've had life happen. And I want you to know that has been my experience. Life has not happened in the way that I thought it should. There has been pain, there has been loss, there has been suffering, but I truly know that I have not been let down. And so, yeah, I'm gonna read the thing in the chat. Robert Holbrook Smith, Dr. Bob Smith, August 8th, 1879 to November 16th, 1950. Also known as Dr. Bob. He was an American physician and surgeon who founded Alcoholics Anonymous with Bill Wilson. Smith was born in St. Johnsbury, Vermont, where he was raised to Susan A. Holbrook and Walter Perrin Smith. His parents took him to religious services 4 times a week, and in response, he determined he would never attend religious services when he grew up. He graduated from St. Johnsbury Academy in 1898, having met his future wife, Anne Robinson Ripley, Anne Smith, at a dance there. You know, and the thing with Dr. Bob is he wasn't a dumb guy. When we read through his, like if you read through his story in its totality, what you'll see is he went to some of the best universities in the United States. He was in Ivy League schools, top medical schools. He was not a dumb guy, and he was afflicted with this illness, and it took him out at the knees. And yeah, you can see Dr. Smith right there. And you know, I think it's a natural place to leave off, because where we're going to pick up is on page 156, and next week, and we're going to see Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson's their 12th step work, and how they worked with others, and how from one alcoholic to another have we all got here today. And so I'll end the recording, and we'll pick it up there next week.